Welcome everyone to this Learn seminar by Antonina Levatino, who is working with us currently as a visiting scholar. And she will be talking about her work as part of the big Reform Ed project led by Tony Berger around accountability incentives and teachers' motivation to perform a conjoined experiment. Can I give the floor to you?
Thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank you for hosting me and for giving me the opportunity to present my work in progress in the framework of this seminar. So I would have been delighted to be there in Amsterdam with you, but I am in my last month of pregnancy, so I cannot travel anymore. So the paper I'm presenting today concerns research I'm conducting with my colleagues Gerard Ferrer Esteban, which is based at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya in Barcelona, and Antoni Verger, who is based at the Department of Sociology of the Autonomous University of Barcelona, like me. And as Melanie said, the title of my presentation is Accountability, Incentives, and Teachers' Motivation to Perform, a Conjoint Experiment. So, So as we all know, accountability policy has become a centerpiece of the global education agenda. The most diffuse form of accountability in the field of education is performance-based accountability, which is focused on the evaluation of student performance through large-scale assessments and national standardized tests. In performance-based accountability system, school actors face consequences of a different nature, individual, collective, reputational, or material, according to their level of performance. Salary bonuses and other financial rewards constitute one type of material consequences that have been introduced in some contexts to reward teachers and schools whose students have performed better in the national standardized test. The idea behind is that the perspective of gaining a financial reward stimulate teachers' motivation and consequently foster the quality of their teaching. Nonetheless, the extent to which these financial rewards really motivate teachers and in what circumstances remains controversial. Behavioral sciences have longer dealt with the issue of what motivates workers. According to behavioral scientists, it is possible to distinguish between two types of motivation: intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is a motivation that is self-determined. This means coming from within the individual and originated by personal desire, the enjoyability of the experience, the self-identification with the profession, etc., independently from external factors. Another type of intrinsic motive is prosocial commitment, which rises from the desire to work and make effort to help others. Extrinsic motivation, on the contrary, is externally determined and is at stake when an individual performs a behavior to satisfy an external demand or to obtain an external reward. Extrinsic and intrinsic motives can be interconnected. Regarding the effect of external rewards, two theories are worth mentioning here. The expectancy theory, according to which the perspective of a reward pushes workers to put more effort in their work when the reward is valued by the worker. And the over-justification explanation, according to which if the external reward is perceived as very high, the person can be induced to think that their action was motivated exclusively by the reward, rather than by an intrinsic personal interest in the action, so that external rewards can be detrimental for people who are intrinsically motivated. So as you can see, the effect of external rewards is not so clear. A more recent theory is the goal-setting theory, according to which workers are primarily motivated by clear and specific goals. Regarding teachers' work motivation, for a long period of time, research on teacher work motivation has put forward that teachers are primarily intrinsically motivated. With new public management reforms in education, goal setting and material rewards are increasingly used as motivational tools. Research is, however, inconclusive about the power of these tools in actually increasing teacher motivation. Mintrop 2004, for example, found that rather than seeing goals and rewards as motivators, teachers perceive them as distorting the meaning of their work. On the other hand, as highlighted by Mintrop and Ordonez 2017, in some circumstances where resources are lacking or salaries are low, material incentives can be pursued and seem to motivate extra effort. Working condition and context seems therefore a central piece to understand how teachers' motivation works. On this point, recent research has highlighted how the support received by the principal also has a crucial role in explaining teachers' commitment with their job and teachers' motivation. In our view, exploring teacher work motivation is very challenging. First of all, as said before, working circumstances might be crucial in explaining work motivation. At the same time, however, individuals might self-select and determine working circumstances, so endogeneity might be at stake, so that it is difficult to compare different contexts with observational studies. Secondly, intrinsic and extrinsic motives often coexist, and it is difficult to assess what is more important. We think that it is problematic to ask directly about each motivation separately by means of traditional survey questions with batteries or Likert scales, from not important, for example, to very important, because with this type of question, it is common for many respondents to state that several attributes are very important. Furthermore, self-reporting on how work motivation might reflect desirable professional ideologies, especially with the teacher profession, which has been longer considered as an emotional, affective job, mostly intrinsically motivated. So that it might be difficult for a teacher to openly admit to be motivated by material or extrinsic motives. So if we look, for example, at this graph, which is taken by the work by Mintrop and Ordonez 2017, we can see that extrinsic motives are less reported by teachers. So this, of course, could reflect true motivational patterns, but it might also be determined by social desirability. So in this paper, our research questions are: what motivates teachers to work? What is the motivational strength of external rewards compared with other work motives? To what extent teachers in different contexts systematically differ in the importance they give to different work motives? To answer to this question, to these questions, we use an experimental methodology. More precisely, we conduct a conjoint experiment. This is a technique where respondents are normally presented with two different options, with two alternative options, and they're asked to choose between one of them. In our case, respondents are presented with two alternative school contexts with different characteristics, and they're asked to choose between one of them, and the characteristics are randomized. By analyzing whether a school context is selected or not, we can assess the role of each characteristics in increasing or decreasing the likelihood of each option to be chosen. Conjoint analysis is useful for our research purposes for many reasons. Firstly, the experiment allows us to take into account the fact that people motivation is not unidimensional. Rather, it may be made up by different kinds of motives and simultaneously influenced by different features. The use of conjoint analysis allows identifying and comparing the importance assigned by the respondent to each characteristic on the same scale. And compared with direct questioning, the conjoint experiment allows to address the potential social desirability bias at stake. To explore the importance of contextual factors, we applied the experiment in three very different accountability contexts: Chile, Norway, and Spain, more specifically Catalonia. Chile is one of the countries with the longest legacy of performance-based accountability policy. This policy were adopted in this country in the 80s to promote school choice, but later were also used to evaluate teachers, distribute incentives among teachers in school, and more recently, to take decisions about school closures. In Norway, the performance-based accountability system is much more recent and was adopted following a quality assurance rationale after national disappointment with the first PISA results. The national assessment generated a lot of stress and discomfort in the first years in place, but sedimented afterward to feed professional reflexivity and curriculum delivery effectiveness among school owners, principals, and teachers. Regarding Spain, performance-based accountability in this country is even a shorter story. There was an attempt to implement a national assessment in 2013, but faced fierce opposition by key educational stakeholders. Most Spanish regions, such as Catalonia, have developed their own assessment framework, but are ruled by a national law that does not foresee any type of formal consequences attached to test results. These results are simply devolved to schools with the expectation that they will trigger improvement dynamic. So in a nutshell, as you can see, in our sample, we have 3 educational systems with performance-based accountability policies in place, but that follow remarkably different accountability approaches. We have high stakes accountability in Chile, thick but reflexive accountability in Norway, and soft and low stake accountability in Catalonia, Spain. Our experiment was inserted in the Reform Ed project survey. And beside the experiment, the survey provides rich information on the profile of teachers, their professional preferences, and the school context in which they work. In our study, we asked respondents to choose between 2 alternative working scenarios, so 2 alternative schools, that randomly differed on characteristics related to 5 different work motives: pro-social commitment, types of assessment of teaching quality, goal setting, support received, external material rewards. So this table shows you each dimension, as well as the characteristics that were randomly displayed for each dimension. So I leave you some moments to read.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? So this is to understand how the accountability system impacted on their motivation, or what drives their motivation?
So it is both things. So from one side, like we will for each country, we will see what is like the strength of this characteristic in motivating teachers to choose a school, and then we will compare like we will like hold constant the country and see whether there are like universally preferences. What I will show you today are like the results like for the different countries separately, and we will compare the different contexts. And what I will do is like share with you the hypothesis we have that can underline these results, so about the possible mechanism at stake. Okay. And this is where because this is a work in progress, so this is where we are in this moment.
Yeah. So did you present teachers with like 2 vignettes that every time they had to choose between?
Yeah, the thing was this, like in a screen, you had like 2 different school scenarios. It's like not a vignette, it's like a table with like the first school is this. You have in this school you have students with mixed ability. You are evaluated based on school. It's not a vignette, it's like a table. It's the same concept, but the benefit of the conjoint is like that it's easier to read because it's like a table with some characteristics that are randomized. And it's also very nice that you can have the 2 schools in the same screen, so that they can easily compare it and they say, okay, I prefer this one.
Yeah.
So you can, with this method, you can see, so you are not evaluating each vignette separately, but you are comparing, so they can see the trade-off and they can choose one, so that you can see the strengths of one option to lead the decision when you take all the.
And then I'm guessing they are doing multiple comparisons, and that will lead to kind of an overall
Yes.
preference score in the
Yes.
end, right?
Because yeah, from one side, one person is like asked to choose between several couples of choices.
Yeah.
And then also, like, as the characteristics are randomized, you don't have of course, we in the analysis we take into account that an individual make the same, like we cluster the responses by individuals, but then it's also like, as it's the randomization is full, we don't have the characteristic of the person are not determining the characteristic they are seeing.
Yeah.
So that it's easier to compare without having these confounding variables that are going on that maybe confound the results. Okay.
Interesting. So, thank you.
So this was the experiment. So I will show you a figure that displays some preliminary results. So I will explain you a little bit how to read the table, because I don't know if you're familiar with this type of graphs. So the dots indicate the point estimates, whereas the lines show 95% confidence intervals for the marginal mean of each characteristic. So when the dots are on the right side of the graph, this means that this characteristic is found to increase the likelihood of an option to be chosen. When the dot is of the left side of the black line, this means that the characteristic, when it is displayed, discourages teachers to choose an option. The overlap between the lines, for example, here, you see that these lines are overlapping, means that the difference is not significant, not statistically significant. And when there is no overlap like this means that the difference is statistically significant. So to test for the presence of any country differences across the preferences, we performed a test comparing two equations, one estimating only the effect of the attributes, and the same model measuring the interaction between the country variable and the attributes. So during the presentation of results, I will always inform you about the differences between the three countries and whether these differences are found to be significant. As I told you before, I will also advance and share with you the hypothesis we have that could explain the results found. So I will go now dimension for dimension to comment you and share with you the hypothesis we have on underlying mechanism. So the first dimension, we call the first dimension pro-social commitment, because it's the one that comes closest to the ethical component of teacher work, that is to carry out one's own work for the benefit of others. So the attributes that were randomized in this dimension refer to work in advantaged environments, in disadvantaged environments, and in classrooms with mixed ability students. So the first evidence that we can observe in this figure is that teachers of the three countries have a clear preference to work in working environments with classrooms with mixed students. However, the behavior of the preferences in relation to the other attributes show significant differences between Chile and Norway and between Chile and Catalonia. The differences between Norway and Chile are unclear at the limit of significance of 10%. So these differences are explained by the different approach teachers have in relation to classes with advantaged and struggling students. So in Chile, in fact, it seems that having a class with advantaged students is not so motivating. So knowing the context of Chile, we think that the fact that Chilean teachers prefer not to work in socially advantaged settings with apparently easy to teach students could be explained by the fact that in this context, the standards of learning and the performative requirements from the school side might be higher, and parental agency can be much more demanding than in other settings. So while working with struggling students is not a preference in either country, in comparative terms, is an even less desirable preference in Norway. if you compare, for example, with Chile. So a possible explanation for this could be that in Chile, Chilean teachers work more frequently in social vulnerable schools than their Norwegian counterparts, have naturalized this type of school setting further and give more importance to intrinsic work motives such as pro-social commitment. However, it could also be that vulnerable schools in Chile are usually public schools, which offer better working conditions to teachers in terms of salary, length of the contract, and stability. So Chilean teachers, by saying that they prefer to serve struggling students in comparison to Norwegian ones, may express a preference for working in public schools. So this is something that we will further explore in our research in the future. If we look at Catalonia, of Catalonia in their parts, Catalan teachers, as they say, express a clear preference for mixed classes and do not find environments with a high concentration of neither struggling nor advantaged students as motivating. An explanation for this could be related to the fact that the Catalan education system is highly segmented and teachers are aware of the challenges involved in teaching in school with high level of social vulnerability, including insufficient administrative support and high teacher turnover. And furthermore, we think that this is most maybe precise, a more precise explanation. I have to say that in the last years, a public discourse on the importance of distributing vulnerable students across schools as a measure to tackle school segregation has been installed in Catalan society. And teachers would join this consensus by expressing a clear preference of teaching in mixed ability class groups. So with this preference, maybe Catalan teachers are like positioning themselves on the part of against school segregation. So this was the first dimension. As for the second dimension, which is related to the type of assessment of teaching quality, this dimension is where we find more similarities between the teachers of Norway, Chile, and Catalonia. This dimension is indeed the dimension in which the teachers of the three countries agree and do not show any significant differences. Teachers in the three countries prefer, as you can see, to be evaluated for their classroom practices through observation and dislike to be evaluated by external standardized tests. We think that this result is very interesting because you can observe that despite showing very different regulatory frameworks for accountability, there is an agreement on the rejection of external standardized tests as a teaching quality assessment in the three countries. And this phenomenon is likely to be linked to the reductionist nature of performance-based assessment, which focus on a very narrow part of teachers' work, ignoring the process and focusing on the outcomes. It may also have to do with the technical difficulties or even the lack of attempts in some countries to separate teaching quality from the influence of the school social composition on the results, even in system based on value-added models, which is perceived as unfair and invalidates any attempt to measure teaching quality. In contrast, classroom observation is a qualitative and process assessment instrument, which is preferred by teachers in the three countries included in the analysis. Classroom observation is a tool often associated with peer evaluation, which does not focus on the external measurement of student performance, but on the teaching and learning processes. And these types of assessment tend to provide immediate and meaningful feedback for teachers, especially when the observer is a more experienced colleague. So we will test this hypothesis on this preference by inserting in our analysis interaction between this dimension and preference in teaching methods of the teachers included in the analysis. And finally, as you can see, this is also interesting to observe that the teacher portfolio is a tool that generates indifference among teachers in the three countries, even if it is also a qualitative and process assessment strategies that falls under the category of self-evaluation. So although teachers prefer teacher portfolio over the external evaluations based on standardized tests, they do not consider it as a priority. And even in Chile, it is perceived negatively. This could be explained insofar as teachers perceive it as another source of paperwork that adds burden to their quality, to their busy work schedules. And in addition, this type of assessment can be seen as less rewarding because it is not accompanied by meaningful feedback or an immediate feedback from somebody else. So this is the second dimension. If we go on the third dimension,
sorry, can I just ask a question? I was just wondering about this type of graph, the line in the middle.
Yes.
Is that does that belong to the format of this type of graph? Is there always a line in the middle, or is it something that you did for some reason?
The line in the middle means that this attribute, when there is an overlap, for example, I show you now, for example, here, when there is when the line overlap these lines, this means that this attribute is not found to increasing nor decreasing the preference. So it's like it has not significant impact. So this graph is like a way to show graphically the results of a regression, because with the regression is always like these stars and you have to set the coefficient. So this graph is like the line in the middle is like there is no don't find any significant results about the impact of this variable. It would be an insignificant.
A 50-50
chance. It's 50-50, exactly. That's why this is 0.5, as you can see.
Yeah, but no, I just wondered, because I just noticed with myself that the line has a particular effect on how I perceive the results, because like when a lot of the results are quite close together, it's like 0.4, 0.6, so there's a slightly bigger chance that people will give one answer than the other, but the line makes it seem as if they're like in different realms, it's on the left of the line or on the right, like there's some kind of absolute difference between them.
But Anders, this is very important that you also, because this graph is also like, it does not only tell you the significance of the results, but also the importance of an attribute. For example, if when the point with the lines, when a result is very far away from the line, this means that this result is driven the decision more than the other. For example, another type of analysis that we did, I didn't present it today because it's too much information, is also to see the preference scores. So for example, if you see this, for example, you can see that support, I will comment on support, but support is found to be less important than goal setting, for example, or material incentives. Because if you see, for example, the length, like the least preferred option and the most preferred option for support in all the countries is not so far from the line. So support is not driven really the decision. It is most important, for example, assessment or a goal or material incentives. And this is also something that we also will analyze, because there are some small differences between countries. But it is something that is like, I wanted to comment on the effect of the attributes, because it is where we found more differences. But it is also interesting to observe that support, for example, is a dimension that does not drive the decision as goal setting or other things. But yeah, thank you for the comment, because it's very interesting. So this graph is only a way to present the results in a way that it is more like clear to. We could also, for example, make a very like the same graph with all the dimensions together and see for the difference very easily. And this is what we did to interpret the data. So it is more straightforward than putting a regression table with stars and coefficients.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so one moment. So I was on the third dimension about goal setting. One moment. Okay. So the other dimension is goal setting, the goal setting dimension. So in this dimension, it should be noted that in all the countries, there is a clear preference for well-defined and communicated objective over the absence of objective or over objective that are not always clear and well communicated. As for the differences, they are more clearly observed between Norway and the other two countries. In Norway, in that teachers prefer to have no goals at all, than to have some unclear and not well-defined goals. So the fact that there is less rejection in Norway for not having defined goals, if we compare with the other two countries, could be explained by the greater level of professional autonomy and horizontality in teachers' relations with school principals. So a possible greater dependence on hierarchical relations in Chile, for example, could also explain why, as a lesser evil, goals that are not entirely clear and communicated are preferred over their absence. In contrast, in Catalonia, as you can see, the lines are overlapping, so no clear differences emerge between no goal being set and not well-defined goals. So having, as I told you, having well-defined and communicated goals is the preferred option by Catalan teachers, but this preference is not as intense as in other two countries. So as I told you before, like this dimension is not so important. As you can see, the difference between this and this is less than the difference between this and this, or between this and this. So this means that the goal setting is driven less the decision of Catalan teachers. So this dimension is less important for Catalan teachers, as in the other two countries. And we think that this could reflect that in this country, teachers enjoy high level of pedagogical autonomy, and the practice of goal setting and achievement assessment, which has been installed by very recent educational reforms, is not settled yet. So we will test this hypothesis about the autonomy and the leadership, the relationship with teachers, by introducing in further analysis an interaction between this dimension and a variable we have in the survey about leadership, the type of leadership in the school where the teachers are working, to see whether we find some interesting results that could explain these differences. So regarding support, so there are similarities in the preferences expressed by Norwegian and Catalan teachers, while we have different preferences in terms of support with respect to Chilean teachers. The differences are statistically significant between Norway and Chile, and between Chile and Catalonia, whereas no significant differences appear between Norway and Catalonia. So for Chilean teachers, as you can see, like the support dimension is not so important as the other dimension, but for Chilean teachers, it is slightly more important to have supporting family and principals, whereas in Norway and Catalonia, it is of most importance to have supportive colleagues. And there are reasons to believe that governance factors may explain these identified differences. In both Norway and Catalonia, in that there is a long tradition of democratic and horizontal governance school, which could explain why peer support is more important than the one received from principal and family. In fact, in Catalonia, principals tend to be primus inter pares, and their training and role has not been professionalized yet, although different legislative changes have attempted to deepen the differentiation between the teaching and leadership roles. So Catalan teachers tend to perceive principals as peers or colleagues, rather than managerial figures that are external to the teaching profession and that are equipped with a different type of skill set to support teachers' work. In the specific case of Norway, professional collaboration and exchange is very much established within teachers' work. According to Thalys 2018, Norway is in fact the OECD country where teachers engage more frequently in discussions about the learning development of students, and in discussion to ensure common standards in student evaluation. Thus, peer support, collaboration, and exchange is strongly embedded in the teaching profession in this country. So we will test also this hypothesis in the further research step by introducing interaction terms in the analysis with a variable we have in the survey about collegiality to see whether there are differences that can be observed. So the fact that in Chile, families seems to count more than in other countries can also be explained by the fact that the educational system in Chile is very much market and client oriented, the educational systems in Catalonia and especially in Norway, whereas family choice hardly plays any role in students' allocation in schools. So this is the hypothesis we have about this difference. And then we go to the material incentives dimension. So regarding material incentives, in all the three countries, there is a preference for collective budgetary rewards. This is rewards that go to schools instead of to the individuals. But apart from this important element in common, many other differences emerge. In fact, the three countries differ significantly in the trends of some preferences on material rewards. So Norwegian teachers especially dislike, as you can see, individual salary bonuses. In Catalonia, as in Norway, teachers dislike individual salary bonuses and clearly prefer budgetary rewards to schools. In Chile, instead, the situation is the opposite, and scenario where individual salary bonuses are previewed are the most preferred ones by Chilean teachers. So we have several hypotheses to explain this. So an hypothesis to explain these results could be linked to the fact that salary bonus policies might be more accepted in Chile as they are a more common policy in Chile. According to Thalys 2018, in Chile, more than 65% of lower secondary teachers work in school where formal appraisal can result in salary increases and management has responsibility over salary. Whereas this percentage, for example, goes down to 4% in Norway. Another hypothesis we have could be linked to teacher salary conditions. So teacher salary conditions could also explain why teachers in Chile give more importance to individual salary bonuses than Norwegian and Catalan teachers. In that, according to Thalys 2018, Norwegian and Catalan teachers have salaries above the OECD average and report being satisfied with their salaries also above the OECD average. In contrast, Chilean teacher salaries are objectively much lower, and teacher satisfaction with their salary is also lower than their European counterparts and also as the OECD average. So this could explain why teachers in Chile adhere to the idea of the individual salary bonuses, not because they see them as a productivity trigger, but as a necessary evil, an additional source of resources and of income that helps to complement substandard or unfair salaries. So we will also try to test this hypothesis by introducing interaction term with respondent salaries and this dimension. So another hypothesis that we have to explain why individual salary bonuses are really disliked by Norwegian and Catalan teachers could be related with collegiality. As I told you before, in a context of greater collegiality among teachers, such as in the Norwegian one, or very horizontal professional relations, such as in the case of Catalonia, in which, as we saw, there is a clear preference for the support received by colleagues, as you can see here, it is also possible that individual incentives are perceived as a threat to work relationship and to solidarity relationships among colleagues. So, as several international experiences have indicated, incentives assigned to individual teachers can have a potentially divisive impact on the school teaching staff. So this could explain why Norwegian and Catalan teachers who are more used to a collegial work environment, and who give more importance to support received by colleagues may especially dislike individual salary bonuses. So as I told you before, we have a variable in the survey on collegiality. So we will also explore this hypothesis further by introducing interaction terms between this variable and this dimension. So as you can see, these preliminary findings are very stimulating and help us formulating several hypotheses on the mechanism that can explain them. So testing this hypothesis is something we will do in the next step of our research. So we will continue by testing the hypothesis with this preliminary hypothesis, this analysis generated by introducing these interaction terms with other variables highlighted. So teacher condition, teacher salary, collegiality, performative pressures, and other variables we have in the survey. We also have conducted several qualitative interviews, in-depth interviews with teachers working in different working environments in the 3 countries. So we will triangulate the results obtained with this qualitative information. But yeah, I think that although the findings are preliminary, they also show some interesting points for discussion. So overall, these preliminary findings show that intrinsic and extrinsic motives are not mutually exclusive, rather coexist in a complex interplay. I also think that there are some preferences that seem to be internationally and universally shared, such as the preference for to work in mixed classrooms, the preference for one's own teaching quality to be evaluated through qualitative and process assessment methods such as classroom observation, the preference to have clear and well communicated goals, and even the preference for budgetary collective awards at the school level over individual rewards. So this finding seems to echo Letendre's idea of a transnational system or regime of teachers' belief, which is being forged in an area in which educational reforms disseminate globally. So we have these shared preferences and as these results come from very different countries, make us hypothesize that there are like this, I don't know, transnational regime of teachers' belief. But nonetheless, there are other aspects of teachers' work motives, specifically concerning external support and individual rewards, which are more context-specific. In these cases, motivation seems to be very connected with to the specific characteristic or the specific working condition and policy configuration in different contexts. So regarding external rewards, the analysis seems to support self-perception and expectancy theories, according to which more important than the reward per se is the meaning that the reward may have for the individual, and when the reward is valued by the recipient, it might increase motivation. From what we found, it seems that we will further explore it, that rewards are mentally construed, interpreted, and understood differently by different groups of teachers, so in a contingent way. So we cannot say that rewards are motivating or not motivating teachers. So we have to look at other things. So because as we have seen, teachers differ systematically in how important they find a given reward, according to many things. So we hypothesize that the country regulation and the material and symbolic conditions in which the teaching profession is developed also have a role. And specifically, the results also provide some evidence that should be further explored on the extent to which the introduction of extrinsic incentive might compensate or might be seen as a compensation for adverse working conditions or for very low teacher salary. As I told you, so we will further explore this hypothesis in the future. So thank you very much. I will be very happy to hear your feedback or your comments on the presentation.
Thank you,
It was clear. It's a lot of information, but I hope it was clear. And yeah.
Thank you, Antonina. That was very insightful, very interesting to think about how countries and teachers in countries compare in terms of their motivation, and also how that is a function of the kind of accountability system in which they operate and the capacity and autonomy that they have to shape their own work. Can you go back to the last slide, as I have a question on some of the conclusions that you had, and I see other questions also emerging. If you have questions, just raise your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I have to find out how to move to the slide for a moment again. Yeah. Okay, now.
Yeah, yes. So here you are on the one hand saying that there are some preferences that seem to be common for all teachers across the world in their preference for mixed classrooms, etc. But then also you say that it to some extent seems to differ by groups of teachers and is a function of how they kind of interpret certain rewards. So that to me seems like difficult to kind of that those seem to be two contradictory conclusions almost. Can you elaborate a little?
Yeah, of course. I don't want to say that they are like this. They are similar, but they are different. But actually, as we test several dimensions and several characteristics, so it was very interesting for us to observe that, for example, about the external evaluation, or like the assessment of teaching quality, or like there are some preferences about some features that are really clear that they are similar and there are no statistical significant difference. So we think that in this aspect, teachers in different systems are similar. But there are some other aspects, such as support and external dimension, that where the teachers are similar. As we tested several dimensions simultaneously, we could observe, and the results are really robust, that in some dimensions there are like convergence, but in some dimensions there are divergence. And this is something that we want to elaborate further.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe you could take your slides down so that you can also see the audience when they ask questions, and then Anders has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, my question is related, I think, actually. I found it a really interesting presentation to see differences between these contexts, also similarities and so on. But one of the most interesting elements of your study to me was that the reasons underlying preferences, even similar preferences, may be different, and perhaps that's also part of what Melanie was asking, because when you start to speak about a kind of transnational set of beliefs, or like context transcending beliefs, you sort of skip the underlying reasons for those preferences that people have, or the actual meanings of those preferences. So maybe it's more like a kind of overlapping consensus where, see, the resulting preferences in terms of these choices they get is the same, but the reasons for the preferences may be different. And then, yeah, the context is more important than it might seem, even where the superficially the preferences are the same. So that was one thing, and a smaller point is DC and Ryan also use the concept of autonomous motivation, and it seems that might be a useful concept for you, because you also say, well, you know, their intrinsic and extrinsic motivations are linked in complex ways, but the concept of autonomous motivation is a broader category than that of intrinsic motivation, because it includes motivations where it's not really an intrinsic motivation to do something, because it's not like it doesn't come from a real interest in doing this thing or liking it or so on, but you do value it. You do subscribe to the importance of whatever the practice is. In that sense, it's an autonomous motivation that seems to cover some of the motivations you mentioned.
Well, thank you so much, Anders, really, because the first comment is really stimulating, because actually you are right. We have focused only on the reasons, the possible reasons behind the differences. But as you say, it can be that superficially preferences about some aspects are like converging, but the reasons why they are in each country, there is this preference are differing. So this is something that we are, of course, it is more challenging maybe, but maybe we can, we have the interviews, so we can explore it further, and this is very stimulating. Thank you, because actually it was like a surprise for us to see this convergence, and we were like so interested in these similarities, and we say, this is a transnational regime of beliefs. But you're right, maybe the different, the underlying motives or that are driving these preferences are like differ. So we have to take it into account, and we will do. Thank you so much. And also thank you for the suggestion to add this concept to our theoretical framework. We will take it into account to see whether it can enrich, of course, our theoretical framework. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you again for your presentation.
Maybe one question I have in addition to that is, and maybe you're not yet able to answer it, given that you still have to analyze your qualitative work perhaps, but I also wonder if you might find a different type of preferencing if you had asked teachers through an open question, for example, because now you require them to make a choice between two, and then that leads to kind of a preference score, but their actual preference hierarchy, for example, might be completely different than if you don't ask them to choose between two.
Yeah, this is something that is like inherent to the method, yeah, and why we choose this method, because I think there are research that asked openly, like Mintrop and Ordenes, they are like directly ask to teachers, like qualitatively with an open question or direct question. But we have the problem that then, and this is something that is like always when we work with preferences, that's why I became interested in this methodological, in this method of the conjoint analysis, because actually in real life, you're not open, you have to choose between things. So I think, of course, that's why we want to triangulate with other sources of data. And of course, that's why it is important to have many research of different kinds dealing with the same research question. But in this case, the advantage of conjoint experiment is exactly like it is like a mimic of the real life. Because in real life, you have to make choices, or you have like real conditions that are not corresponding to your idea, and you have to think about the trade-off. And this reflection on the trade-off may give you insights on what is preferred. Because actually, I remarked that in many works about teacher work motivation, teachers are reporting that they are motivated by these internal motives of helping others. It is very difficult to find a work where there is a direct question about an external reward. And then this is found to be more important than helping children. But it can be that in some circumstances, teachers have economic problems or something, they would prefer to go in a school where a financial incentive can be at stake. So I don't know, maybe it's not their ideal, but in a concrete situation, it would be. So that's why we preferred in this case to have this type of research, because it's a new method to ask to answer to this question, and we would like to see whether we find something.
Yeah, I think it's particularly helpful when you compare countries to understand how teachers are choosing between different trade-offs, and that's, I guess, where the strength lies. But just this, I would be, I guess, a bit hesitant to conclude that this is what they would prefer overall, because the choice of trade-off to present them will very much drive their responses, obviously. So your decision in which types of preferences you have to choose in between is going to be really driving your results, I guess. So to me, the strength lies in the comparison and being able to understand the differences in preferences between countries and trying to explain that from your qualitative work.
But also I think, this is my view, you're right, but I think also one straight can be like to see, okay, this is, for example, a disclaimer that we had in the question was like, you have to choose between one of the two options. We are aware that neither option is your ideal, but if you would like be obliged to choose, which would be your preferred one? And this type of question force you to make as you say, like a hierarchization of motives or of features and see, okay, in this they are similar, in this, okay, I don't mind which report I have. So there are like some dimensions that drive this decision. So the strength of a dimension to lead or a feature to lead the choice is very informative about what is at the it's not an ideal situation, we know, and this is something we will have to make clear in the paper when we write it. But it's like, it's very important to see at the very end of the question, if you are obliged, which dimension or which feature is most important to you. And this is what this type of question is giving us the opportunity to answer. This is,
Thank you. We are now at 1 o'clock. I see that Anders wants to raise, but if you could keep it short, that would be good.
Yeah, I was just wondering whether, like in philosophy, there's the problem, a well-known problem of the transitivity of preferences, whether they are transitive or not. And I just wonder whether that might also play a role here. It's like the idea that when you have three options, A, B, and C, and someone prefers A over B, and also says that they prefer B over C, you might think, oh, then they must prefer A over C. But it's a real discussion point whether that is in actual reality also the case. And there are people have come up with examples where this might not be the case. So it seems logical, but perhaps it's not like that. And that complicates the picture of people's preferences and how they work. So I don't know to what extent it matters for you, but it just popped up.
I don't know. It's very like we have to think about it.
Topic to go into the discussion of the methods, I guess.
But I think maybe it may not be an issue because you are not like taking one individual and make a choice, but you are like you have a very big amount of individuals, so it's the mean that is like, so I don't know.
Thank you.
I will have a look. Thank you. Thank you really for all the comments. And they are really, really inspiring. Despite there were not a lot of comments, but the comments that I got, they are really inspiring for go further. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad that we could have this discussion about the paper, and looking forward to reading it when you've published it. So thank you everyone for joining. It's 1 p.m. now, after 1 p.m. So I'm guessing you'll all will have lunch now as well, at least those of us who are in the Netherlands. Ola, good to see you as well. We'll have another opportunity for more discussion in our next seminars. But thank you again, Antonina, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Yes. Yes. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.